The 9,680th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in the Middle East. The agenda is adopted. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. Members of the Council have before them document S/2024/528. The text of the draft resolution submitted by the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. I wish to draw the attention of Council members to document S/2024/460, a letter dated 11 June 2024 from the Secretary General addressed to the President of the Security Council. I would like to thank the Secretariat for allowing us to return to the practice of disseminating the text of
counts 7.3 million displaced people, including 6.9 million in the eastern provinces alone. International humanitarian law violations are impeding
and the work to preserve it. However, we are clear that the continued Houthi restrictions on the movement of the mission and the proliferation of weapons in Hodeidah must end. The UK is committed to securing a sustainable peace and long-term stability for Yemen, including by supporting the UN-led process to achieve
conflict-affected and frontline districts in the Hodeidah Governorate. The Houthis' wanton attacks on international shipping and blatant. We repeat our call for Iran to stop these illegal weapons transfer. At least 45 Yemeni employees of UN agencies.
We have a major calamity. The button has gone broken, but the sound was there. I assure you. The
9,681st meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation concerning the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 77 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representatives of the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Rwanda to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite Special Representative of the Secretary General and Head of the United Nations Organization Stabilization Mission in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Ms. Bintou Keita, to participate in this meeting. It is so decided.
Совет Безопасности
The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I wish to draw the attention of Council members to document S/2024/482, the report of the Secretary General on the United Nations Organization Stabilization Mission in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, as well as document S/2024/519, a letter dated 28th June 2024 from the Secretary General addressed to the President of the Security Council. I now give the floor to Ms. Bintou Keita.
Mr. President, distinguished members of the Council, unfortunately the speaker's microphone is not working properly. Thank you for this opportunity to present the report of the Secretary General on the Democratic Republic of the Congo. I would also welcome the presence of His Excellency, the Permanent Representative of the DRC in New York, Mr. Zeno Mukongo, and His Excellency, the Permanent Representative of the Republic of Rwanda, Ernest Arwanmusio. Since my last briefing on the 27th of March of this year, the political dynamic has mostly revolved around the establishment of a new government, which was inaugurated during the night from the 11th to the 12th of June of 2023, following the elections of December 2023. I very warmly welcome the appointment of the first female prime minister in the history of the country, Madame Judith Suminwa Tuluka. The new government, in addition to the prime minister, has 17 women out of 54 ministers, which is a net increase of 27 to 33% of the representation of women, and points to the commitment of the head of state to promoting gender equality in DRC and his efforts as the champion of positive masculinity of the African Union. Since the new government took office and the Bureau of the National Assembly, I had the opportunity of speaking with the Prime Minister, several ministers, and the Speaker of the National Assembly. During these discussions, we were able to discuss the new plan of action of the government and the possibility of support by UNESCO of its implementation in conformity with its mandate.
Of the Council. Just a few days before the election of the Permanent Bureau of the National Assembly on 19 May, armed elements attacked the residence of Vital Kamerhe, leading to the death of 2 policemen in charge of his security. The attackers subsequently breached the premises of the Palais de la Nation. Order was quickly restored, with the Congolese security forces arresting over 50 individuals subsequently charged with participating in the attacks. I condemn in the strongest terms this attempt to destabilize national institutions. The security situation in eastern DRC has continued to deteriorate, reaching alarming levels of violence and civilian displacement. I am extremely concerned about the rapid expansion of the movement du 23 Mars M23 in North Kivu and the spillover in South Kivu, despite numerous operations conducted by the FRDC, regularly supported by MONUSCO and SAMI-DRC. Over the course of the last 2 weeks, the M23 captured several strategic locations in North Kivu, including the town of Kanyabayonga, straddling the Lubero and Rutshuru territories. During their latest military offensive, the M23 and its backers burned several FRDC bases and triggered additional population displacement, further exacerbating an already catastrophic humanitarian and human rights situation. As documented by the group of experts, which reports to the Sanction Committee established by this Council, the government of Rwanda has reinforced its support to the M23, enabling it to make major territorial gains across eastern DRC. The rapidly escalating M23 crisis carries the risk, the very real risk of provoking a wider regional conflict. In addition to the escalating M23 crisis, a spate of horrific attacks carried out by the ADF, Zaire and Codeco armed groups in Ituri province has caused almost 300 additional victims during the reporting period. Further south, the ADF have also entered Lubero territory in North Kivu on several occasions, killing an unprecedented number of civilians. Between 4 and 7 June alone, more than 90 people were killed in isolated corners of the territory. In South Kivu, the M23 crisis also reached Kalehe territory, with indirect fire hitting Minova and other nearby towns, killing and injuring several civilians and generating further displacement. In the southern part of the province, rumors of M23 infiltration of the Haut Plateau of Uvira, Fizi, and Mwenga have further exacerbated community tensions, which require the urgent attention of government authorities.
Mr. President, distinguished members of the Council, in this complex situation, MONUSCO has continued to provide support to the military operations of the FARDC. Joint operations have contributed to the protection of civilians, especially as far as operations against Codeco and the Mai groups in Ituri. MONUSCO also completed the training of 500 new FARDC recruits in the framework of the new joint FARDC MONUSCO operation called Northern Scalpel. The Springbok operation in defense of Goma and Sake has continued to confront operations of the M23 and is continuing. SAMI DRC has continued its deployment and should reach its full operational capacity by the middle of July. And on this opportunity, I would like to express my deepest condolences to South Africa, which lost 2 soldiers on the 25th of June during a mortar attack of the M23 against its base in Sake. I also hope for a prompt recovery to the wounded.
We are witnessing in the DRC one of the most severe, complex, and neglected humanitarian crises of our times. The escalating violence in the East continues to trigger massive population displacement, exacerbating an already dreadful humanitarian situation. Overall, the DRC today counts 7.3 million displaced people, including 6.9 million in the eastern provinces alone. International humanitarian law violations are impeding humanitarian aid delivery. The growing proximity of the front lines and the presence of weapons, including heavy artillery, within and around displacement camp and spontaneous sites significantly compromise the security of the displaced and resident population. At least 15 bombardments have hit IDP sites or their immediate surroundings, killing almost 30 people and injuring many more. What is sadly more is that gender-based violence does not stop to increase. For the whole year of 23, 122,960 cases of gender-based violence were reported, marking a 3% increase from 22. Female victims, including girls, accounted for almost 90% of all cases, with incidents of sexual violence against children increasing by 40%. This is solely the tip of the iceberg, as many cases remain unreported. Based on current trends, 24 risk becoming another, sadly, record year. The 2024 Humanitarian Response Plan, launched on 20th February 2024, seeks for $2.6 billion to provide humanitarian assistance to 8.7 million crisis-affected people. As of mid-June, the plan remained only funded at 26%. I thank Member States for their support and encourage them to provide additional support. In addition, I also call upon Member States and regional organizations to increase their efforts to reduce humanitarian suffering by strengthening their engagement towards political and regional solutions and by recommitting to tackle the root causes of conflict driving the dramatic upsurge of humanitarian needs. I welcome the 2 weeks humanitarian truce in Eastern DRC, which began at midnight on July 5th. I urge the parties to use this as an opportunity to inject fresh momentum into ongoing regional peace efforts.
Mr. President, distinguished members of the Council, as requested in Resolution 2717 of 2023, the Secretary General submitted to you a letter identifying the different possible options to support the SAMI DRC, the mandate of which was endorsed by the Peace and Security Council of the African Union in March. I won't revisit the various options that were presented to you, but I would like to recall, as mentioned in the letter, that there won't be a military solution to this conflict and that peace will not be able to be reestablished unless there is a lasting political solution. I would like to express my gratitude and wholehearted support for mediation efforts led by President of Angola, João Lourenço, between the DRC and Rwanda in the framework of the Luanda process. They need the full support of the international community, and here I would like to applaud the upcoming ministerial meeting of the Peace and Security Council of the African Union at the initiative of Angola to discuss the situation in the East. These regional efforts must be conducted in conjunction with the mediation efforts at the provincial and local level, aimed at facilitating the disarmament of armed groups in the spirit of the Nairobi process. As part of the implementation of its mandate, MONUSCO has continued to support the disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration efforts of the government, in particular in Ituri and in certain provinces of North Kivu, as well as the efforts linked to the reform of the security sector. In Lubero, in North Kivu, a reintegration project benefited over 1,800 former combatants. As part of the reform of the security sector, MONUSCO supported the establishment of a national unit in charge of coordinating the reform of the security sector under the auspices of the Special Advisor of the President. Mr. President, distinguished members of the Council, on the 25th of June, Prime Minister Judith Suminwa Tuluka and myself chaired the closing ceremony of the operations of MONUSCO in South Kivu, putting an end to 20 years of operations in the province. As you were able to read in the joint report submitted to your council, the disengagement in South Kivu took place within the established time frame thanks to close cooperation between the Congolese authorities and the mission by courageously tackling the security and logistical challenges jointly identified. I thank the Congolese authorities for their flexibility and pragmatism throughout this process. The joint evaluation report on the disengagement has made it possible for us to draw important lessons from this process, which will be very useful to the joint planning of its next phases. In parallel, the process of transition is continuing. A roadmap, that is a provincial transition plan for the province of South Kivu, together with a support plan of the UN country team, have been finalized. These plans identify priorities, available resources, and future needs. I encourage member states to fully support this transition, including financially, so that it goes smoothly. I would also like to underscore the important role played by the Peace Building Fund in the framework of this transition. In the context of the disengagement and transition, the acceleration of PDDRCS will require decisive determination on the part of the authorities to convince the armed groups of the need for disarmament, starting with the provinces of Tanganyika, South Kivu, Maniema, and Ituri, and until the end of the conflict in North Kivu, as well as a long-term commitment by the international partners of the DRC. The UN system, for its part, will continue to work closely with the authorities to ensure a technical and operational support for the PDDRCS. Mr. President, distinguished members of the Council, to conclude, I would like to share with you an extract of a poem written by the young people of Uhuru Knowledge Center, and which expresses very sadly the perils of being young in North Kivu and bears witness to the urgency of both national and international support. To live in inhumane conditions, walking endless kilometers, on a quest for peace, but at each halt it's war that reigns supreme. An infernal cycle of fleeing and bombs falling on the IDPs of Mugunga after this constant fleeing. Trauma and fear have become our daily companions. Villages burned, houses set on fire, the hearts of entire families shattered in Kishishe, in Bomba, in Kichanga, in Rubaya, in Kurochi, and Mugunga. Anger is boiling over. The more time passes, the more the impasse and the rhythm of violence settles in, while we would actually prefer to dance to the beat of justice, peace, and reconciliation. Those millions of children must return to their villages as they thirst to return to their classrooms. Synopes of the future, may these children be saved. We have a duty to listen to this Congolese youth and to support it wholeheartedly for the future of the country. Thank you for your kind attention.
I thank Ms. Keita for her briefing. I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements, and I give the floor to the representative of France. Mr. President, I thank Ms. Keita for her briefing, and I reiterate to her the full support of France. I would like to emphasize several points. France is gravely concerned by the current escalation in the east of the DRC. This violence is fueling the crisis and violations of international law. France condemns the bombing of the Mugunga IDP camp on May 3rd and demands that the full truth be established regarding this incident. We also condemn the attacks which led to the death of humanitarian personnel on July 1st. France welcomes the July 4th announcement of a 2-week truce between the warring parties. This should pave the way for a resumption of dialogue with a view to a settlement within the framework of the Rwanda process. All parties must act to this end. We support the efforts of the President of Angola. This truth must also allow for comprehensive humanitarian access. We condemn the actions of all armed groups in the east of the DRC, including the M23, which has continued its offensive since the beginning of the year and extended its control towards the north of North Kivu province. France denounces the pressure exerted by the M23 on MONUSCO in order to take control of certain areas. The 2024 report of the panel of experts highlighted the ties maintained by several armed groups with state actors. France condemns the violation of DRC's sovereignty and territorial integrity, Rwanda's military support for the M23, and the increasing presence of Rwandan military forces on Congolese territory. These actions must stop. The DRC, for its part, must put an end to the ties its armed forces maintain with the FDLR, and we welcome its commitment to demobilize this group's combatants. France welcomes the deployment of SAMI DRC. We have taken note of the Secretary General's recommendation for strengthening cooperation between MONUSCO and this regional force. A draft text will be presented to Security Council members shortly to this end by my delegation. France also asks that regional forces strengthen their coordination with MONUSCO. We welcome the work of the panel of experts established pursuant to Resolution 1533, as well as the renewal of the sanctions regime. We recall that the arms embargo in the DRC only applies to the armed groups and that it no longer applies to DRC authorities or regional partner forces. MONUSCO continues to play a key role. The joint report by the UN and the Congolese authorities is clear on the challenges encountered during the drawdown from South Kivu. The conditions that made this drawdown possible are not yet in place in North Kivu or Ituri. France welcomes the Congolese government's determination to consolidate the transfer of responsibility in South Kivu before moving on to the next stages. We have full confidence that the government of the DRC will continue its cooperation with the United Nations. I thank you. I thank the representative of France for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Ecuador.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank the Special Representative of the Secretary General and Head of MONUSCO, Madam Bintou Keita, for her briefing. I also would like to acknowledge the presence of the representatives of the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Rwanda at this session, and would like to make a respectful appeal to make, in good faith, all efforts necessary to channel all efforts towards a constructive dialogue. The appointment of Madam Judith Suminwa Tuluka as the first female prime minister in the history of the DRC is a milestone that should be underscored because it promotes the participation of women in decision-making positions. In addition to her, there's 17 other women in the government, which should continue to be strengthened because the representation of women in decision-making positions is a key aspect in more inclusive, safe, and peaceful societies, and a institutional and democratic proof of combat against violence against women and other vulnerable groups. Mr. President, we're very concerned about violence of M23 in North Kivu and its expansion in two parts of South Kivu that coincides with the withdrawal of MONUSCO. This situation confirms the need for cooperation between the DRC and MONUSCO in implementing the plan of withdrawal of the mission as an element of support to governmental control over all its territory. Regarding the deterioration of the security situation, it's important to recall the clear message of the Security Council issued last month regarding foreign support for M23 and foreign support for certain armed groups such as FDLR. Such support should cease immediately. Ecuador acknowledges the diplomatic efforts of mediation between the DRC and Rwanda, led by the government of Angola. It's possible that the signature of an agreement of cessation of hostilities between the government and various armed groups in the province of Turi. This has become a possibility, which is why Ecuador encourages the government to continue tackling the causes of intercommunal tensions and to implement the agreement in the framework of the disarmament, demobilization, and community recovery and stabilization program. The atrocities and crimes recorded in the DRC, including gender-based sexual violence and serious violations against children, cannot remain unpunished. In this context, I'd like to highlight the work of MONUSCO and its commitment to ensure the end of recruitment and the use of children in armed groups, and its work in strengthening the judiciary through the implementation of the joint program of support for judicial reform of the United Nations and the technical and financial support to combat against impunity and crimes against humanity. Mr. President, the humanitarian situation in the DRC continues to be critical, with over 7 million IDPs and approximately 400,000 people who returned to the country in 2023, which converts this crisis in one of the largest around the world, which forces the international community to respond significantly to meet these urgent needs. In this context, we'd like to welcome the humanitarian truce that was agreed in the east of the DRC thanks to the good offices and the support of the United States and Rwanda. We call on the parties to respect this truce. Ecuador considers the deployment of the SADC mission with the support of the African Union is essential as a demonstration of regional support for peace and stabilization of the DRC, and which the Security Council must support, as well as it should support all regional, bilateral, and international initiatives that, in a coordinated fashion, supports the DRC in consolidating peace and political stability. Lastly, we'd like to reiterate that only dialogue and peaceful means will achieve sustainable peace. This is why the Nairobi and Rwanda processes must continue, as they have become key elements in the peace architecture of the region. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Ecuador, and I now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. We welcome the representatives of the DRC and Rwanda to the Chamber. And I'd like to start by thanking the Special Representative for her hard work and that of her team under exceptionally challenging circumstances, and for her briefing today. First, the United Kingdom is encouraged by the 2-week humanitarian truce that has been announced, particularly given the worrying recent intensification of violence in North Kivu, including the fall of Kunya Bayanga to the UN sanctioned group M23. We call on all parties to the conflict to uphold the truce. We hope this will support the journey to lasting peace. We also welcome discussions between representatives of regional governments to reinvigorate the Luanda and Nairobi processes, and we underline that a political solution to the conflict remains essential. The United Kingdom strongly condemns attacks on humanitarian workers, including a recent attack in Butembo which killed 2 aid workers working for the British NGO Tear Fund. Targeting humanitarian actors is unjustifiable. We recall the inviolability of civilian camps, and we express our serious concern about civilian lives being endangered by the positioning of heavy artillery near IDP camps. We are also deeply concerned by attacks on areas known to be heavily populated by civilians, and we deplore ongoing reports of sexual and gender-based violence. Second, the United Kingdom continues to call for MONUSCO's transition to be responsible and carefully considered, to ensure that the DRC authorities are in a position to assume responsibilities and avoid a security vacuum. We encourage MONUSCO to implement lessons learned from its withdrawal from South Kivu, as it looks ahead to subsequent phases of disengagement from North Kivu and Ituri, where conditions for civilians are already dire. We further encourage MONUSCO and the DRC government to collaborate closely on a strategy for the protection of civilians that focuses on strong political and community engagement. Third, the United Kingdom takes note of the Secretary-General's letter on options for potential support for the SADC regional force, SAMI DRC. It's important that any support does not impede MONUSCO's ability to deliver its current mandate. This is a dangerous moment for MONUSCO and its peacekeeping personnel. MONUSCO must avoid being drawn into an escalating regional conflict. President, this is why any support to SAMI DRC should be both anchored in the Rwanda and Nairobi political processes and implemented in accordance with the UN human rights due diligence policy. Continual review against these criteria will be critical to any support we give. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Thank you, President. I have the honor to deliver the statement on behalf of the members of the A3+, namely Algeria, Guyana, Mozambique, and my own country, Sierra Leone. We thank Ms. Bintou Keita, Special Representative of the Secretary General in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Head of United Nations Organization Stabilization Mission, for a comprehensive briefing. We take note of the report of the Secretary General for the period 20 March to 19th June. The A3+ recognizes the critical work the United Nations is carried out in an extremely fragile, complex environment and other difficult circumstances. We express our support for the work of MONUSCO and calls on concerned parties to cease all attacks against the mission. We seize this opportunity to congratulate His Excellency President Felix Tshisekedi and his government on the appointment of the first female Prime Minister, as well as the appointment of 17 women in the cabinet. We convey our best wishes to the government and people of the DRC. We welcome the participation of the representative of the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda in this meeting. President, the people of the DRC have suffered a prolonged misery. For 3 decades. Eastern DRC has been a battleground for a conflict with deep and tangled roots. We are alarmed about the deteriorating security situation in the Kivus and Ituri, and are especially concerned about the protection of civilian risk posed by this problem. Violence linked to armed group activities, including the M23, ADF, FDLR, and CODECO, continue to inflict a heavy toll on civilians, including women and children. We are concerned about the risks posed to civilians in IDP camps and call on all parties to ensure the protection of civilians in keeping with the provisions of international law, including international humanitarian law. We condemn all attacks, including bombings of displaced camps. We are gravely concerned about attacks on critical infrastructure, including the Goma airport, and attacks on MONUSCO peacekeepers and assets. The people of the DRC have suffered for long, and it's high time the conflict be resolved. Regrettably, however, there are no signs of improvement since the Security Council last met on this file. The Congolese people must no longer continue to suffer the atrocities of the armed groups in the DRC. In light of the situation on the ground, the A3+ would like to make the following points. First, we strongly condemn the resurgence in fighting, in particular around the Kayamboyanga in North Kivu province. If the fighting persists, there is a risk of regional spillover in the Great Lakes region with devastating consequences. The trials the Congolese people go through and the trauma caused by the M23, ADF, CODECO, FDLR, and other groups are unacceptable. We call on all armed groups operating in the Eastern DRC to cease their attacks on civilians and withdraw from occupied territories, and give civilians, including internally displaced persons, the much-needed respite they deserve. The principles of international humanitarian law must be respected by all parties. Second, we reiterate our support for regional talks and processes. We applaud the effort of His Excellency João Lourenço, President of Angola, for his relentless effort in keeping the Luanda process alive and for working towards peace and stability in the DRC. In this same vein, efforts in complementing the Luanda and Nairobi processes with the aim of energizing political dialogue at the regional level and de-escalate tension should be supported. We call on all stakeholders to renew their commitment to the success of these processes. Additionally, we are supportive of the African Union Peace and Security Council communique endorsing the deployment of SAMI DRC and echo the calls of the Southern African Development Community and the government of DRC for UN support to SAMI DRC in line with Resolution 2717. The A3+ has also taken note of MONUSCO's withdrawal from South Kivu in line with the comprehensive disengagement plan. We continue to urge respect for the wishes of the Congolese people, while at the same time stressing the importance of a responsible, gradual, and sustainable withdrawal. We look forward to receiving the proposal for the next steps of the withdrawal. In this context, we thank the Secretary General for its proposed options for UN support to SAMI DRC. Members of the A3+ are considering these options thoroughly and are prepared to engage with fellow Council members to chart the best path forward in keeping with the interests of the Congolese government and people who have borne the brunt of the conflict for decades. We stress that the unity of Council members is a moral imperative in order to ensure SAMI DRC receives the support it needs for peace and stability in the DRC. Third, We need to address the alarming humanitarian situation in Eastern DRC, particularly through the provision of adequate funding. Living conditions in displaced persons camp are already deteriorating, with the DRC categorized as having one of the worst displacement crises in the world. Continued armed group activities, including the offensive by M23, will only continue to exacerbate the humanitarian consequences for the more than 6 million people that have been displaced from their homes and communities. Women and children are suffering the brunt of the deteriorating humanitarian situation, and we continue to pay the highest price in this conflict if nothing is done to bring the conflict to an end. We have seen, for example, the continued grave violations against children and the additional cases of sexual exploitation and abuse recorded during the reporting period. The A3+ urges full accountability for these violations. Equally important is the timely delivery of humanitarian assistance. However, delivery of humanitarian aid requires protection of humanitarian convoys and personnel in line with international humanitarian law. Parties to the conflict must show restraint and adhere to their obligations and refrain from targeting civilians and civilian infrastructure. We must respond in a timely manner to the urgent humanitarian needs of displaced persons and ensure they have access to basic services. Finally, the recruitment of children into armed groups does not only violate international law and instruments, such as the Convention on the Right of the Child and the Optional Protocol on the involvement of children in armed conflict, but also perpetuates cycles of violence and exploitation of children. It is essential for all parties involved, including state actors, armed groups, and other stakeholders, to be held accountable for their actions and to face justice for their role in recruiting and using children in conflict. By upholding accountability and addressing the root causes of child recruitment, the DRC can move towards a more just and sustainable future for its children and community. In conclusion, President, members of the A3+ urge the international community, in particular the Security Council, to pursue a comprehensive approach in tackling the root causes of the Congolese conflict. We urge all actors to respect the territorial integrity and sovereignty of the Democratic Republic of Congo and condemn all such violations, including any illegal mining of its natural resources. We are committed to supporting the government of the DRC and its people. Achieving peace and stability in DRC and the wider Great Lake region is of high importance to the African continent. I thank you.
I thank the permanent representative of Sierra Leone for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, President. Thank you, SRSG Keita, for your briefing today and for your steady leadership of MONUSCO. We also welcome the representatives of the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda today. The United States strongly commends all parties to the conflict in eastern DRC for committing to a 2-week humanitarian truce that began July 5th. We thank Angola for its partnership in reaching this truce and will cooperate with them to monitor and verify it. We also thank MONUSCO for its support to this overall effort. These regional diplomatic efforts are the way to achieve permanent solutions and a lasting peace for the long-suffering communities of eastern DRC. The United States further commends MONUSCO for safely completing its drawdown from South Kivu in line with its mandate and the joint disengagement plan agreed by the DRC government and the UN. We extend our gratitude to the UN personnel who have served in South Kivu and offered protection and support to its inhabitants over the last 20 years. With phase 1 of the disengagement complete, we are troubled by the impact on civilian protection and humanitarian access. We are also concerned that DRC security forces have struggled to effectively deploy into and maintain the positions MONUSCO occupied. We urge the UN and the government of the DRC to anticipate and address these challenges in future phases of MONUSCO's disengagement to avoid consequences for civilians, such as the consequences we have seen in South Kivu. We are appalled by the surging number and lethality of attacks by the armed group Codeco in Ituri province. In addition, the ISIS-affiliated Allied Democratic Forces killed more civilians in June 2024 than in any previous month. These despicable acts of violence would undoubtedly have been more grave without MONUSCO's interventions, further underlining the significant contributions MONUSCO continues to make to security and the protection of civilians in these provinces. Amid such instability and violence, and recognizing the crucial role MONUSCO plays in defending population centers and facilitating humanitarian access, this Council should not, in good conscience, support MONUSCO's departure from North Kivu or Ituri until more progress is made to de-escalate the ongoing conflict. Colleagues, we were outraged by threats and obstructions by M23 and the Congo River Alliance against MONUSCO positions, supply routes, and movements in North Kivu. It is irresponsible for Rwanda, as a major troop-contributing country to UN peacekeeping, to tolerate such behavior by M23. We reiterate our call for Rwanda and the DRC to engage through the Luanda process to find a mutually agreeable pathway towards de-escalation. The United States stands ready to support efforts towards a resolution to the conflict. Such a resolution is critical for the security of the people of Eastern DRC, the ability of the Congolese to secure, govern, and develop the eastern provinces, and for Rwanda to ensure its internal security and focus on its role as a security exporter. Colleagues, we are alarmed by the rapid escalation of the conflict in recent months. According to credible reporting, Rwanda's military interventions and operations in North Kivu have extended beyond mere support for M23 operations to direct and decisive involvement, allowing Rwandan troops in M23 to achieve military dominance across large swaths of North Kivu and greatly increase their territorial expansion. Rwandan troops number upwards of 4,000 on DRC soil and have committed attacks that killed civilians, including the May 3rd attack on the Mugunga IDP camp, which killed dozens and wounded many more. All parties in eastern DRC must take every precaution to protect civilian populations, especially those in IDP sites, including by removing artillery and other heavy weapons in the vicinity of such locations. The more than 2.5 million people displaced by M23 and the RDF have endured untold suffering and, at a minimum, deserve physical protection from violence. Colleagues, the United States recognizes the role and sacrifices of SAMI DRC in supporting the DRC government's efforts to defend its territorial integrity. The primary goal of the United States in eastern DRC is to support a de-escalation of the conflict and put an end to the instability and human suffering the conflict has caused. That is why we believe this Council should guard against steps that could further inflame regional tensions, including extending significant MONUSCO support to SAMI DRC. We are concerned extensive MONUSCO support to SAMI DRC may not reflect our shared interest in securing a political solution to the conflict. This is why we support the Council's authorizing only limited MONUSCO support to SADC's mission within its area of deployment, in furtherance of its mandate, without prejudice to its tasks, and within existing resources. Finally, Rwanda and the DRC must urgently take immediate steps to de-escalate, fully commit to regional diplomatic processes, and work to hold accountable all actors responsible for human rights abuses, steps which represent the only hope for peace. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for her statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of China.
President, I thank SSG Bintou Keita for her briefing. I welcome the presence of the permanent representatives of the DRC and Rwanda. Last month, the new government of the DRC was inaugurated smoothly, unveiling a new chapter in the country's governance. China welcomes this. We look forward to all parties in the country uniting as one and accelerating nation building with the government's National Action Plan as the blueprint to achieve peace and stability. In light of the SG report, I wish to stress the following 3 points. First, to push for the cessation of fighting to end violence among armed groups. In the past 3 months alone, over 500 civilians were killed by armed groups, 7.3 million forcibly displaced. On the 3rd of July, a private Chinese company located in DRC was attacked, causing several deaths and disappearances of Chinese citizens. China strongly condemns such an act, and we urge that the perpetrators be immediately arrested and held accountable by law. China urges all armed groups located in the Eastern DRC to lay down weapons and withdraw from occupied areas immediately. In April, the DRC government concluded ceasefire agreements with multiple armed groups and engaged in bilateral security cooperation with Uganda and Burundi. A pilot DDR project in North Kivu was also completed. Progress such as this deserves full recognition. The international community must respect the sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of the DRC, assist constructively in its efforts to maintain security and stability and improve the humanitarian situation, to promote an early settlement of the Eastern DRC issue. Second, to facilitate an immediate regional de-escalation. There has been growing divergence and discord among regional countries on the issue of Eastern DRC. In its report, the Secretary-General expressed his concern over the risk of regionalization of the conflict in the Eastern DRC. China calls on countries concerned to remain calm and exercise restraint to settle differences through dialogue rather than military means. We commend Angola for facilitating the meeting of foreign ministers of the DRC and Rwanda last March. We encourage regional countries and organizations to play a bigger part in advancing the Luanda and Nairobi processes. We hope SSG Keita can maintain coordination with Special Envoy for the Great Lakes region, Xia Huang, to continue to work for peace and promote peace talks. Third, to move forward MONUSCO's drawdown process in an orderly way. The mission has successfully withdrawn from South Kivu last month. Going forward, the UN system should assist peace-building and consolidation efforts in South Kivu. MONUSCO needs to stay engaged with the DRC government to ensure a safe and orderly drawdown process. A string of recent attacks against MONUSCO calls for a greater sense of urgency and more effective measures by the relevant actors to ensure the safety of peacekeepers. SADC is engaged in peacekeeping activities in the eastern provinces. We support reasonable adjustment of MONUSCO's mandate to ensure its coordination and complementarity with regional forces. We are ready to participate constructively in the Council's deliberations on supporting regional forces. I thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China for his statement, and I now give the floor to the permanent representative of Slovenia.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I thank and appreciate SRSG Keita for your briefing today and also for your dedicated work. We fully support MONUSCO and commend the troop and police contributing countries. And I welcome representatives of Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda to today's meeting. Since our last meeting, the security and humanitarian situation in eastern DRC has deteriorated considerably. We are deeply troubled by escalating violence, including intensified confrontations involving M23, FDLR and Wazalendo, as well as deadly attacks by Codeco, ADF Zaire and other armed groups. the unprecedented territorial expansion of M23, the expansion of ADF, and the significant increase of civilian casualties are alarming. We urge M23 and all other armed groups to immediately cease hostilities and withdraw from occupied territories. We welcome the announced 2-week humanitarian truce and urge all parties to fully respect and implement it. I would like to highlight 3 points. First, we remind all parties of their obligation to respect international humanitarian and human rights law. The conflict has led to appalling levels of sexual violence, including in and around internally displaced person sites, recruitment and use of children, and other grave violations against them. We strongly condemn over 170 attacks on aid workers this year alone, as well as continued attacks on peacekeepers. The escalating use of heavy artillery near IDP camps is alarming, and we condemn it. Accountability for those endangering civilians with these reckless tactics must be ensured. We furthermore call for accountability for sexual violence, sexual exploitation, and sexual slavery that disproportionately affects displaced women and girls. All states must end any support to armed groups. We are alarmed by external support to M23 and unauthorized foreign military personnel in DRC. Sovereignty and territorial integrity are basic principles of international law, and they must be respected. We urge Rwanda to fully and immediately withdraw its military from DRC. There is concern about reports indicating that despite directives to prohibit cooperation with FDLR, some elements of armed forces of DRC continue to engage with FDLR. We again urge all parties to end support to all armed groups. Second, we note the completion of MONUSCO's withdrawal from South Kivu, marking the end of the first phase of its disengagement from the country. Given the escalating security situation, the continued withdrawal of MONUSCO requires careful and strategic planning. A safe, responsible, gradual and sustainable withdrawal remains essential, focusing on the ongoing and strong partnership between the DRC government and the UN, including the Security Council, as well as regional partners. There is ongoing concern about the possible impact of the withdrawal on the protection of civilians, especially in light of massive displacement. We recall that the primary responsibility for the protection of civilians lies with the government. In regions where civilians, including IDPs, depend on MONUSCO protection against armed groups, coordinating the deployment of Congolese security forces with the mission's withdrawal is vital. Third, we are deeply concerned about the conflict escalating into a wider regional crisis, as highlighted by the Secretary General in his report. SRSG Keita warned just now that there is a real risk of regional conflict. We support regional efforts to promote peace and stability. We commend President Lorenzo of Angola for revitalizing the Rwanda process and facilitating recent diplomatic engagements with DRC and Rwanda. And we urge Presidents Tshisekedi and Kagame to engage in inclusive political dialogue. We note the near-completed deployment of the South African Deployment Community Mission, SAMI-DRC, and stress the importance of effective coordination between MONUSCO and regional forces for protecting civilians and peacekeepers. We also note the Secretary General's letter of June 28 outlining options for possible support to regional forces. Any support must strictly comply with the UN human rights due diligence policy and the African Union compliance framework. Madam President, in conclusion, there is one clear and united message coming from this chamber repeatedly, that there is no military solution to this conflict, and we urge all involved parties to heed this message from the Council loud and clear. Slovenia remains steadfast in supporting efforts to end the conflict. We will continue to support peace initiatives and regional cooperation to ensure sustainable resolution. Thank you.
I thank the Permanent Representative of Slovenia for his statement, and I give the floor to the Permanent Representative of Malta.
Thank you, President. I also thank SRSG Keita for her updates and welcome the representatives of the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda to the Chamber. This Council recently adopted a press statement that expresses strong condemnation of foreign military support to the M23 and any other armed group operating in the DRC. We demanded the cessation of such support, reaffirming the DRC's sovereignty and territorial integrity. We also condemned attacks conducted by the ADF, all attacks against MONUSCO, and the unacceptable threats exerted by the M23 against the mission. Malta strongly reaffirms these messages today. We welcome the final report as issued by the group of experts. Their work remains valuable to identify the complex dynamics in the region, including the responsibilities of armed groups and national states. As MONUSCO has completed its withdrawal from South Kivu, security spillovers from the North Kivu are affecting the South. 500,000 IDPs recently moved to South Kivu to escape the brutality of war in the North. We are concerned that Twiraneho operatives in South Kivu are committing grave violations against children with persistent recruitment, also in collaboration with the M23. We encourage the Congolese authorities to spare no efforts in ensuring a sufficient military presence in the region and to prevent bases from falling into the hands of armed groups. We take note of the Secretary General's letter proposing options for MONUSCO support to Sami DRC. Malta recalls that any logistical and operational support should be consistent with OP20 of Resolution 2717. We recall that any such support should be in strict compliance with the UN human rights due diligence policy, and we stress the importance of protection of civilians, close coordination and information sharing. On the political front, we echo the Secretary General in condemning the events of 19th May. Namely the attempts to destabilize the democratic institutions in the DRC. Those responsible for such acts must be held accountable. On a positive note, Malta welcomes the appointment of a first female Prime Minister, along with 17 women, to form part of government. This marks a milestone in promoting the meaningful participation of women in leadership positions and hope it serves as a model for others. President, I take this opportunity to commend Angola for its efforts to de-escalate regional tensions and conflicts. We hope that the leaders of the countries concerned return to the negotiating table. Many root causes of conflict still need to be addressed. It remains an international responsibility to ensure that illegally extracted mineral resources from the Eastern DRC are not integrated into the international market. We are concerned that Rwanda, the region from where half the coltan national production originates, is now under M23 control. Information indicates that production continues at high levels, while miners and local traders are being forced to sell the ore to M23-linked traders. Meanwhile, an unabated humanitarian catastrophe continues to unfold in the Eastern DRC. We condemn the attacks against the Monunga camp on 3rd May, as IDPs are daily confronted by the risks of open conflict. We welcome the announcement of a 2-week humanitarian truce and hope it will bring relief to communities caught in the conflict. We demand that all violations of international humanitarian law and violations and abuses of human rights end immediately. These include gender-based violence and sexual violence in conflict recruitment, use and abduction of children, and attacks against schools and hospitals. Malta continues to advocate for a more significant presence of child protection advisors in South Kivu in line with Resolution 2717. I thank you.
I thank the Permanent Representative of Malta for your statement, and I give the floor to the Permanent Representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Madam President. I thank SRSG Ms. Bintou Keita for her informative briefing. I also welcome the representatives of the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda to today's meeting. At the outset, the Republic of Korea reiterates the Security Council press statement on the DRC issued on June 20th. Through the press statement, the Council condemned attacks in eastern DRC, expressed concern about their impact, called for diplomatic dialogue towards de-escalation, and reaffirmed its commitment to DRC's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity. In this connection, we welcome the 2-week humanitarian truce between the parties to the conflict in eastern DRC, which began last Friday. Korea sincerely hopes that this truce prevents the risk of an imminent, fully fledged regionalization and escalation of the conflict, and serves as a beginning for a lasting, peaceful, and sustainable solution to the protracted conflict in the region. Against this backdrop, I'd like to underline 4 points. First, the territorial expansion of armed groups are deeply alarming, and Korea strongly condemns and urges the M23 to fully withdraw from all occupied areas and adhere to the Rwanda roadmap. Continued attacks and the proliferation of weapons on displacement sites that led to attacks early May on the Lakfer and Muganga IDP camps is equally distressing. Recent reports of the DRC group of experts about direct foreign military interventions on DRC territory also raise serious concerns. Foreign military support to armed groups not only intensifies regionalization of the conflict, but also destabilizes the security of the supporting country itself, and therefore must cease immediately. The Security Council should continue to be vigilant on this matter. Second, we welcome the timely withdrawal of MONUSCO from South Kivu and commend the efforts of the UN country team to tailor its support along this transition process. Long-term stability requires relevant peace-building efforts, which is well demonstrated in the South Kivu transition roadmap, including protection of civilians and security, strengthening state authority, and support to the DDR program. In this regard, we very much welcome the development of a new program for social cohesion and community violence reduction in South Kivu by the UNFPA, which will be supported by the Peace Building Fund. Korea has nearly doubled its contribution to $8 million to the Peace Building Fund this year and will continue to support its activities. At the same time, given the intensifying conflict in North Kivu and its spillover into South Kivu, preserving MONUSCO's achievement is crucial. Future disengagement plans should be examined prudently for a gradual, responsible, and sustainable withdrawal of MONUSCO while consolidating the overall transition. Third, we take note of the Secretary General's letter to the Security Council, presenting options for MONUSCO and the UN support to regional forces in the DRC. Regional peace processes are crucial for de-escalation and peaceful conflict resolution. Regional forces, such as SAMI DRC, deployed in connection with these regional processes could serve as a tool to create a conducive environment for a political solution. However, any such UN support to regional forces should strictly comply with the UN human rights due diligence policy. Regional forces should also ensure the highest standards of conduct, discipline, and transparency under a robust compliance framework. Fourth, the dire human rights and humanitarian situation demands urgent attention. The DRC faces one of the world's largest displacement crises, with over 7.3 million people displaced. Human rights abuses, including ethnic reprisals and increasing grave violations against children and gender-based violence, which are reverting to their worst levels, only brings more suffering to the innocent civilians. We urge all parties to adhere to international humanitarian and human rights law and ensure unimpeded humanitarian access. Korea plans to make a significant contribution to this year to address the DRC's humanitarian funding gap. In closing, Madam President, the Republic of Korea reiterates its unwavering support for SRSG Keita, MONUSCO, and the regional organizations in their efforts to bring lasting peace and stability to the DRC. I thank you.
Я благодарю постоянного представителя.
I thank the Republic of Korea for your statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Japan.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to express my gratitude to SRSG Keita for her briefing. I welcome the participation of the representative from the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Rwanda. The attacks in May against the Presidential Palace and the residence of the former DRC Vice Prime Minister for Economy in Kinshasa have given us grave concern. We strongly condemn these acts, and the assailants must be made accountable. We are also worried about the continuous incidents causing number of victims, especially on East DRC. The horrifying incident of shelling against IDP camps in the same month is another consequence of the continued heavy fighting between M23, the armed forces of the DRC, and other armed groups. We strongly condemn such attacks. The victims, including women and children, are in the most vulnerable condition, having fled human rights violations and abuse to gain shelter at the camp. The increased offensive by armed groups, including M23, is devastating the lives of local people and threatening human security. They must immediately cease hostilities and lay down their arms. In this context, Japan welcomes recently reached 2 weeks truce agreement. We sincerely hope this will be fully implemented. The shelling incident by M23 again shows the presence of heavy weaponry in close proximity to the civilian population. Crossfire in the vicinity makes humanitarian access to IDP camps impossible, and those in need face increased risk of abuse, including sexual violence. Actions must be taken to prevent another case involving civilian casualties. We reiterate the utmost importance of respecting human rights and upholding applicable obligations under international humanitarian law. The reported large quantities of sophisticated artillery brought from outside and presence of disguised foreign troops remain deeply concerning. Ongoing support of any kind by any states to M23 and any other armed groups must be stopped immediately. Continuation of such support is bringing the region to the verge of all-out conflict. It is essential to preserve the sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity of the DRC. We continue to support ongoing national and regional initiatives to overcome differences, alleviating tensions among stakeholders, and seek sustainable solutions through inclusive dialogue. The government-led agreement to cease hostilities between several armed groups in Italy should be reinforced by security and confidence-building measures, including implementation of the disarmament, demobilization, community recovery, and stabilization program. Angola has been playing a commendable role in the mediation between Rwanda and the DRC. The Luanda process needs to be observed by all parties in a sincere manner, and we call for avoiding any actions that risks derailing it. SAMI DRC has been trying to help build a conducive environment for the implementation of regional initiatives. Any possible assistance to SAMI DRC by the UN should be provided in strict compliance with the UN human rights due diligence policy as stressed in the SG letter on possible options. we have received a joint report on the first phase of MONUSCO's disengagement. A further gradual, responsible, and sustainable withdrawal requires a synchronized deployment of the adequate national security forces to ensure protection of civilians. We continue to encourage the DRC to promote its nationally owned security sector reform with necessary budgetary measures under the leadership of the newly formed government. Japan continues to support the government's efforts to develop community policing through capacity and institution building for promoting the rule of law. Japan will continue working together with all partners for sustainable peace and stability in the region. I thank you.
Я благодарю представителя.
I thank the representative of Japan for your statement, and I give the floor to the permanent representative of Switzerland.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to thank the Special Representative of the Secretary General, Bintou Keita, for her briefing and for including the touching poem by young people. And I also commend all the work accomplished by MONUSCO. I welcome the presence of the representatives of the DRC and Rwanda at this meeting. I also congratulate the DRC, as my colleagues have done, on the formation of its new government, including the appointment of the country's first female prime minister. Now that MONUSCO's disengagement from South Kivu has been completed and security conditions in the east remain unstable, the DRC is at a decisive crossroads for the lasting restoration of peace on its territory. In order to ease tensions and ensure the protection of civilians, three aspects are particularly important in our view. First, only a political solution based on dialogue and mutual respect can lead to lasting peace and security in the region. As mentioned today by the Special Representative, the intensification of tensions between the DRC and Rwanda represents a real risk of regional escalation and a worsening of the conflict. In this context, we welcome the political initiatives underway and encourage Presidents Tshisekedi and Kagame to meet as soon as possible to engage in a sincere and constructive dialogue. We welcome the efforts of the United States, which have led to a humanitarian truce in the east, and hope that this will lead to a permanent ceasefire. Furthermore, to restore confidence, it is crucial that all states in the region respect their commitments. In this respect, the continued advance of the Rwanda Defense Forces and the M23 in the east of the DRC, notably the recent occupation of several towns in Lubero territory, is unacceptable. This advance constitutes a violation of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the DRC. We urge Rwanda to cease all support for the M23 and to withdraw from Congolese territory. Likewise, we call on the FARDC to honor their commitments and cease all support for the FDLR. Secondly, no lasting peace dialogue can succeed if parties continue to violate international law. Switzerland remains concerned by the increased attacks on civilians, job recruitment, and conflict-related sexual violence in all areas affected by the conflict. The parties must take measures to protect the alien population. In accordance with international humanitarian law, parties must deliver avoid placing military objectives in ordinary and popular areas. Civilians and peace segments must never be targeted. We also unequivocally condemn all attacks by MONUSCO and humanitarian personnel. Indeed, the state parties to conflict have an obligation to respect and protect humanitarian personnel, including local staff, as recalled by Resolution 2730 of this Council, adopted in May at the initiative of Switzerland. Thirdly, while MONUSCO has completed its withdrawal from South Kivu, we are concerned by the security challenges that remain after this engagement. Switzerland encourages the DRC to take over and ensure that security gaps are filled, notably through the deployment of security forces. Furthermore, it is essential that these protection challenges are taken into account in the next stages of disengagement. Finally, any MONUSCO support for regional forces must be undertaken with the understanding that peace and security can only be achieved through sustainable political solutions. This must be conditional on robust application of the human rights due diligence policy and support to ensure adherence to the African Union's compliance framework in line with Resolution 2717. From an operational point of view, any support must be accompanied by an approach focused on the protection of civilians and by effective coordination and information sharing. Madam President, Switzerland remains committed to finding a political solution to the crisis in Eastern DRC. We reaffirm our readiness to support diplomatic efforts and peace talks. We call on the members of this Council to speak with one voice to ensure that these efforts become a reality and lead to a de-escalation of the conflict. I thank you. I thank the permanent representative of Switzerland for her statement, and I will now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of the Russian Federation. We thank Special Representative of the Secretary General, Ms. Bintou Keita, for her briefing. We welcome the participation of the representatives of the DRC and Rwanda in this meeting. We are deeply concerned about the escalation of the situation in eastern DRC in connection with the resumption of the offensive by the M23, as well as the increased activity of other illegal armed groups against this backdrop. We are obliged to reiterate that the ongoing military conflict in North Kivu is the principal cause of the deterioration of the humanitarian situation. The number of internally displaced persons in the DRC is now nearing 7.5 million. The use and the placement of heavy weapons near civilian objects has led to increased civilian suffering and a significant rise in the number of killed and wounded. The shelling of settlements and IDP camps must stop. We're also gravely concerned about the use of advanced weapon systems in the area of hostilities. It is necessary to prevent a further deterioration of the situation, which could have serious consequences for the entire Great Lakes region. The problems in eastern DRC are deep-seated and require balanced and long-term responses that take the fundamental interests of all parties into account. We are convinced that only political solutions can lead to the establishment of conditions for sustainable stabilization. We call for cessation of hostilities and the full implementation of the agreements under the Rwanda process. This should be facilitated by intensified regional diplomatic efforts and mediation between Kinshasa and Kigali. It is clear that success on this track will be achieved only if state engagement with illegal armed groups ceases. We often hear in the Security Council of a conflict becoming forgotten because of an escalation in other parts of the world. The crisis in the Democratic Republic of the Congo is one of the oldest, with a bloody history and unprecedented casualties. Unfortunately, diplomatic efforts to date have yielded very limited results. We call on countries with political and economic interests in the region and influence on the main actors to put the interests of the people of the DRC first. External destructive interference into DRC's affairs is unacceptable. We are also confident that much depends on Kinshasa's effective efforts to stabilize the country, to strengthen the accountability of the security sector and state control throughout all regions, as well as efforts to resolve intercommunal conflicts by launching an inclusive interethnic dialogue. We support the actions of MONUSCO and its leadership. The mission's presence in the conflict zone is an important stabilizing factor. At the same time, we also understand the natural, historical, and political constraints on its work. We call for lessons to be drawn from its successes and failures as soon as possible and in the most impartial manner. We unequivocally condemn attacks and violence against blue helmets. We note the completion of MONUSCO's withdrawal from South Kivu. This is an extremely important milestone for the mission and for many years of peacekeeping efforts in the DRC under the auspices of the UN. The experience gained in the implementation of this phase should prove useful for subsequent phases. In determining the next steps to take in organizing MONUSCO's withdrawal from the country's territory, it is important to take into account the evolution of the situation on the ground and to act in a flexible, incremental, and responsible manner. A security vacuum must not be allowed to develop. At the same time, it is necessary to remain committed to implementing the fundamental decisions adopted by the United Nations Security Council. We welcome the practical support that the South African development community is providing to Kinshasa to address the crisis. It is important to assure a due level of coordination with MONUSCO and to identify effective modalities for joint efforts. We thank the United Nations Secretariat for preparing proposals on the parameters for possible assistance to regional forces by the mission. We encourage our colleagues to consider the option of expanded support for the SADC contingent as part of region-wide efforts to stabilize the situation. The Russian Federation, as a permanent member of the Security Council, will continue to assist in resolving the crisis in eastern DRC. We support the independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of that country. I thank you for your attention. I now resume my function as President of the Council. I will now give the floor to the representative of the permanent representative of the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
Madam President, it's an honor to take the floor before the Security Council under your presence. I would like to congratulate your delegation for the skill with which you are leading the work of the Council. I also would like to thank the permanent representative of the Republic of Korea for their effective presidency last month. I would like to express our gratitude to the Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, and to Madam Bintou Keita, his special representative, for their tireless efforts in favor of peace in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and their active involvement in the negotiated withdrawal of MONUSCO, the first phase of which was completed with success. We would like to pay tribute to the soldiers of peace for their devotion and their sacrifices in the service of the ideals of the United Nations. We're grateful to the member states of SADC for their solidarity manifested by the deployment of the regional force SAMI DRC in support of the Congolese armed forces and MONUSCO, and we honor the memory of soldiers of the SAMI DRC who have fallen on the field of honor. Their sacrifice will not be in vain. Lastly, we would like to hail the initiative of the United States that has led to a humanitarian truce, offering a respite to the civilian populations bearing the full brunt of the Rwandan aggression. Madam President, your Council is examining the report of the Secretary General on the United Nations mission for the stabilization of the DRC and the letter on the support options for the SADC regional force SAMI DRC as presented this morning by the special representative of the Secretary General on the DRC. The joint report, DRC-MONUSCO, on the first phase of the disengagement of MONUSCO, including the roadmap for disengagement in South Kivu and the support plan of the United Nations for the support for the transition in Sud Kivu, must also be taken into account. Allow me to outline the approach of my government regarding the support of the United Nations for the Southern African mission to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, SAMI DRC, and the disengagement of MONUSCO before discussing the report of the Secretary General on the situation in the DRC. Madam President, with regard to the support for SAMI DRC, it's important to underscore that in conformity with the mandate granted by your Council to the Secretary General, my government wrote to the Secretary General on the 13th of April of 2023 in support of the letter of the SADC to request the support of the United Nations for SAMI DRC. This support includes aviation resources, land transport, infrastructure, refurbishment of installations of MONUSCO during its withdrawal, and financial resources to complement the budget of the DRC for the acquisition of drones and strategic air transport, as well as platforms for the collection of information and intelligence. It's important to recall that this request for logistical support and cooperation between MONUSCO and regional forces, in particular those of SADC, is nothing new. Thanks to this kind of cooperation, at the request of our government, MONUSCO had established a rapid intervention brigade, which was successful in defeating the M23, which had been supported by Rwanda in 2012. We read the correspondence of the Secretary General, document S/2024/519 of the 28th of June of 2024, proposing 3 support options for the DRC force, and we're grateful to him. On this point, for lack of a better option, my government is in favor of option 2, which proposes the limited use of logistical means and military capacities of MONUSCO in the hope that these measures will enable the DRC to cover the needs of its logistical and operational mandate. And my delegation here would like to appeal to the conscience of the members of the Security Council to demonstrate realism and to take into account the devastating statistics of the crisis in the east of the DRC, which has lasted almost 3 decades, with a human death toll of several millions and a disastrous humanitarian situation of over 7.2 million IDPs. Madam President, as far as the disengagement of MONUSCO, the government of the Democratic Republic of the Congo endorses the disengagement note co-signed on the 21st of November 2023 with MONUSCO at the request of the Security Council for an accelerated, progressive, orderly, and responsible withdrawal of the mission from the DRC. The note, validated by Resolution 2717 on the 19th of December of 2023 by the Security Council, envisions the departure of MONUSCO in 3 phases. My delegation hails the completion of the first phase on the 25th of June 2024 during a ceremony presided by the Prime Minister, Madam Judith Suminwa, with the departure of MONUSCO from South Kivu and the closing of its offices, bases, and facilities of the mission in that province. This disengagement was made possible thanks to the cooperation between the government and MONUSCO in spite of certain logistical and security challenges. The 2 other phases concern, respectively, the North Kivu for the second phase and Ituri for phase number 3. For the time being, the priority of the government is to consolidate and strengthen the authority of the state in South Kivu to prevent any kind of security vacuum based on the roadmap of the Integrated Provincial Transition Team. So, we are currently in a period of transition during which the government will fully take over the activities formerly exercised by MONUSCO with the support of the agencies, funds, and programs of the United Nations. These activities are budgeted within the provincial roadmap. Its implementation should begin on the 1st of July of this year. However, due to the continued aggression of Rwanda in North Kivu, the next withdrawal phase, phase 2, will begin when the conditions allow for it after the necessary joint assessment. Madam President, the report of the Secretary General is fixated on the attacks of the RDF and M23 against IDP camps, as well as their territorial and military expansion and escalation. This is mentioned in paragraphs 91 and 92 of the report of the Secretary General. As demonstrated also by the recent violent clashes around the city of Kanyabayonga in the territory of Lubero in the province of North Kivu. This is the logical continuation of the facts reported by the group of experts of the United Nations, which affirms that in the recent conclusions of its report on the DRC, that 3,000 to 4,000 soldiers of the Rwandan Defense Forces are currently operating on territories of Nyarongo, Rutshuru, and Masisi.
These troops belong to various RDF divisions, including the 2nd and 3rd Divisions, commanded by Major General Eugene Kubito, and RDF Special Forces, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Augustin Riarasa Migabo, as referenced in paragraphs 42 and 43 of the report of the group of experts. The group has documented the deployment of advanced military technology and equipment by the RDF, including 122mm rocket launchers, mortar bombs, and containers of anti-tank missiles. This can be found in paragraph 46 of the report of the group of experts. However, shortly before becoming acquainted with this report, my government had drawn the Council's attention to the worsening security and humanitarian situation, characterized in particular by the bombings of IDP camps in the east of the DRC, which caused a large number of victims, mostly women and children. This is particularly true of the indiscriminate and deliberate bombings carried out by Rwandan troops and their M23 proxies on February 2nd, 2024, against the Nzali IDP camp, and the tragedy that befell the Congolese populations living in Mugunga IDP camp in North Kivu on May 3rd. These attacks have been sufficiently documented and brought to the attention of the Security Council on numerous occasions, both by my government and by the successive reports of the UN group of experts on the security situation in the DRC. My government even asked the Council in its letter of May 8th, 2024, to convene an open meeting to this end and to demand that Rwanda unconditionally withdraw its troops from DRC territory and cease all support for the M23 or else face individual and collective sanctions. Although regularly informed of this request, the Council remained silent from the beginning all the way to the end of May 2024 for reasons that my delegation still fails to understand. This silence has unfortunately contributed to encouraging Rwanda and its M23 proxies to continue their destabilization of the DRC and the Great Lakes region, aggravating an already chaotic humanitarian situation. In this regard, paragraph 34 of the Secretary General's report states that the cholera, measles, and smallpox epidemics have further aggravated an already complex humanitarian situation. Nevertheless, my government remains confident that the Council will seize this present opportunity to take appropriate measures in response to the hardships endured by our citizens who have been forced into perpetual displacement. Madam President, because it is never too late to do better, my delegation invites you to join us in making the following observations. First, the aforementioned attacks, which have been denounced by the Secretary General of the United Nations, the group of experts of the United Nations, and my government, constitute yet another flagrant violation of the territorial integrity of the DRC, as well as its sovereignty and political independence. They are also a flagrant violation of the Luanda Roadmap. Secondly, the deployment of Rwandan soldiers on the territory of the DRC without invitation or consent from the Congolese state, as well as Rwanda's alliance with the M23 terrorist group with the purpose of destabilizing my country, constitute grave violations of the Charter of the United Nations, the Constitutive Act of the African Union, as well as Resolution 3314-29 of the United Nations General Assembly of December 14, 1974. That resolution defines the act of aggression as the use of armed force by a state against the sovereignty, territorial integrity, or political independence of another state, or in any other manner inconsistent with the Charter of the United Nations. Third, it appears that Rwanda has been guaranteed impunity and enjoys a blank check thanks to its participation in UN peacekeeping operations as one of the troop contributing countries, and this is further strengthened by the Security Council's benevolence towards it. Since 2022, Rwandan forces and the M23 have repeatedly attacked MONUSCO and SAMI DRC positions, as well as helicopters, resulting in the death of several peacekeepers, including peacekeepers from some of the Council's member states. These attacks constitute war crimes. The Security Council must take action because Rwandan authorities are not respecting any of the commitments that they have made. They are destabilizing the Congolese state and defying international and regional organizations. They have even made a public appeal in the international media for support for the M23, an made in Rwanda armed terrorist group, in order to kill Congolese citizens and overthrow the institutional order of the DRC without the Security Council so much as flinching. It must be recognized, Madam President, that the much desired cessation of hostility and de-escalation will not be possible as long as Rwanda and its M23 allies continue to fan the flames of the conflict, and as long as Rwandan leaders fail to respect their commitments under the Luanda process. The Democratic Republic of the Congo will defend its territorial integrity, its sovereignty, and the security of its people at all costs, while remaining open to a political settlement of the conflict with Rwanda through diplomatic channels. However, that path will only be credible if Rwandan troops effectively withdraw from Congolese territory in order to allow for frank and constructive dialogue. My government therefore calls on the Security Council, the guarantor of international peace and security, to become fully cognizant of the danger posed by the current conduct of the Rwandan authorities, and to assume its responsibility by adopting all the necessary preventive measures to put an end to the continuing deterioration of this situation, which threatens the entire sub-region. In view of the above, and in order to contribute to a lasting solution to the security crisis in the east of our country through diplomatic means, and in order to promote peace and stability in the Great Lakes region, the government of the Democratic Republic of the Congo requests the Security Council to do the following. Requests the Secretary General and MONUSCO to provide substantial logistical and operational support to SAMI DRC in order to enable it to fulfill the mandate entrusted to it by the SADC heads of state and government. Define a sanctions regime applicable to Rwanda and its leaders. Sanction the Rwandan state, its leaders, and all legal entities or individuals involved in this aggression, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and serious human rights violations committed by the RDF and the M23 on Congolese territory. Officially demand the unconditional withdrawal of Rwandan troops from the DRC, or else face individual and collective sanctions. Suspend all participation by Rwandan troops in UN peace operations, and declare an arms embargo against it until it ceases its support for the M23 and fully withdraws its army from the territory of the DRC, and denounce and sanction the Rwandan authorities' involvement in the illegal exploitation of the DRC's natural mining and agricultural resources. I thank you. I thank the permanent representative of the DRC for his statement, and I now give the floor to the permanent representative of Rwanda.
Thank you, Madam President, for giving me the floor. Let me also take this opportunity to congratulate you on assuming the presidency of the Council this month. I also thank SRSG Bintou Keita for the briefing, as well as member states for their statements. Madam President, before delving more into the content of the report, allow me to provide some historical context to this Council on the root causes of the current crisis in Eastern DRC. The presence in the DRC of communities of Rwandan origin speaking Kinyarwanda, which is our national language, dates back to before colonial rule. After decades of divide and rule, policies coupled with the stigmatization of these communities, who were considered as aliens by both post-independence authorities and the colonial ruler, there has been various attempts at denying these people their fundamental rights of citizenship, safety, and protection. This complex situation was aggravated in 1994 when the Eastern DRC saw a massive influx of people crossing the border, among which were the perpetrators of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. As a result, hundreds of thousands of Congolese Tutsi were persecuted and were forced out of their homes. They are now refugees living across the region with only one